bent over and gave him a kiss, and he grabbed me, and he said to me that, "You are my son."
Sammy Davis Jr., the legendary entertainer who ruled Hollywood, hid a secret so explosive it could change everything we thought we knew about him. Now, at 64, his son has confirmed the rumors that have swirled for decades: betrayal, scandal, and much worse. What was really going on behind the scenes of his iconic life? Could this truth be even more shocking than the man himself? A tumultuous start for a future star. Sammy Davis Jr. was born into show business, but the glamour you might expect from such a beginning wasn't his reality. His parents, Sammy Davis Sr. and Elvira Sanchez, were both performers, his mother a chorus line dancer and his father a vaudevillian. You'd think this would set him up for a smooth rise to stardom, but life had other plans for young Sammy. When he was just 3 years old, his parents split up. His father, determined not to lose him, took Sammy on the road, performing with the Will Mastin Trio. The road life wasn't all applause and lights for Sammy, especially as he began to witness the stark racial discrimination that would define much of his early career. It was the 1930s, and America was deeply segregated. Despite the trio's success, they were often forced to stay in run-down hotels or the colored sections of towns when performing at white venues. Sammy, however, was still too young to fully grasp the weight of this, but that was about to change. Sammy's real wake-up call came when he was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II at the age of 18. It was here that he faced racism head-on. The integration of the military had just started, and white soldiers from the South made Sammy's life a living nightmare. He was constantly beaten, mocked, and even humiliated in ways unimaginable. One of the most shocking incidents came when his fellow soldiers forced him to drink a beer laced with urine, an experience Sammy would never forget. To make things worse, the beatings were so frequent that his nose was broken several times, giving him that distinctive pancaked look. The physical abuse was just one layer. The mental torment was relentless. Despite all this, Sammy never backed down. His resilience in the face of constant attacks is what shaped him into the entertainer who would later dazzle the world. But even with all that grit, one can't help but wonder, did the trauma he faced so early in life also lead him down some of the darker paths he would eventually follow? This is where the intrigue begins to build, and one thing is clear: Sammy's journey to fame was forged in hardship. The real twist in this early chapter of his life comes after his return to show business in 1945. While most young men would return from war and take time to adjust, Sammy plunged straight back into the spotlight. But the entertainment industry was no more forgiving than the Army. He still faced prejudice, though now it was disguised in the form of backhanded compliments and professional roadblocks. Despite his incredible talent, his journey to Hollywood stardom was met with constant resistance. In fact, after performing a pilot for a TV show in the early 50s, major advertisers refused to sponsor the program simply because the star was a black man. Imagine being one of the most talented entertainers in the country, yet being shut out of opportunities because of the color of your skin. But even this wasn't enough to stop him. When the Will Mastin Trio landed a gig at the New Frontier Casino in Vegas, earning $7,500 a week, an astronomical sum for that time, it felt like things were finally looking up. To celebrate, Sammy's mentors, Mastin and his father, surprised him with a brand new Cadillac. It seemed like a sweet reward for all his hard work, but little did anyone know this car would soon be at the center of a tragedy. As Sammy cruised down Route 66 in his new Cadillac on November 19, 1954, disaster struck. An elderly woman pulled out of her driveway, colliding head-on with his vehicle. The crash left Sammy with severe injuries, the most notable being the loss of his left eye. The steering wheel horn, designed in a sleek bullet shape, went straight into his face. The irony is brutal. The very gift that was meant to celebrate his success turned into the cause of one of the most devastating injuries of his life. After the accident, Cadillac changed its steering wheel design, But it was too late for Sammy. His recovery was nothing short of remarkable. After losing his eye, he quickly adapted, eventually stepping back on stage with an eye patch. The crowd at Cyro's, packed with Hollywood's elite, Spencer Tracy, Gary Cooper, Frank Sinatra, cheered him on, as if nothing had changed. But deep down, something had shifted in Sammy. His determination remained, but now there was a darkness growing, a hint of the personal struggles and demons that would follow him throughout his life. So what drove Sammy to fight so hard despite the odds? Was it just the love for the spotlight? Or was there something more to prove? Hollywood's relentless roadblocks. Sammy Davis Jr. may have made his triumphant return to the stage after his accident, but the hurdles didn't stop there. While his talent was undeniable, the roadblocks Hollywood put in his path were glaring. As the 1950s rolled on, Sammy was becoming a household name in the entertainment world, yet the prejudice against him as a black man was constant and vicious. One of the most notable examples was the failed television pilot for his own show. Despite Davis being a beloved performer, network executives and advertisers refused to back a program with a black lead. This was an era when racial segregation was still enforced in many parts of America, and the idea of a black man headlining a primetime television show was seen as too risky. ABC filmed the pilot, but it never aired. No major advertisers were willing to take the chance on Davis, despite his talent and popularity. It was a devastating blow, but Sammy didn't let it stop him. Instead, Davis leaned on his live performances, which were his bread and butter at the time. One of his most famous gigs was at the New Frontier Casino in Las Vegas, where the Will Maston Trio was finally being treated with the respect they deserved. No longer relegated to the back alleys or forced to stay in colored hotels, the trio received star treatment. But even here, where he was performing for packed audiences, there was a sense that Davis was still fighting for his place in a world that wanted to keep him at arm's length. Perhaps the most shocking manifestation of this was Davis's forbidden relationship with Hollywood starlet Kim Novak. The 1950s were a time when interracial relationships were highly controversial, and the relationship between Davis and Novak was no exception. Novak was a rising star under contract with Columbia Pictures, and her relationship with Davis, who was black, caused an uproar behind the scenes. Harry Cohn, the powerful head of Columbia Pictures, was furious when he learned about their relationship. According to numerous reports, Cohn saw Novak as one of the studio's golden girls, and he was determined to put an end to the affair. Allegedly, Cohn threatened Davis, sending men to rough him up, and even suggesting they break his legs, or worse. Rumor has it that Davis was even kidnapped at one point as a scare tactic, though details on this event are murky. What is known is that the pressure became unbearable, and Davis was forced to end his relationship with Novak. This wasn't just a case of two people being kept apart because of Hollywood's strict image control. It was emblematic of the lengths people in power would go to in order to uphold the racist structures of the time. The studio couldn't afford for one of its top stars to be publicly dating a black man, no matter how talented or popular he was. The story takes an even stranger twist when Davis, under immense pressure from Cohn and fearing for his safety, hastily married another woman, Lorraine White, in 1958. White, a black dancer, wasn't exactly Davis's first choice, but the marriage was arranged as a way to placate Cohn and the studio heads. In exchange for her agreement to this sham marriage, Davis reportedly paid White a substantial sum of money. The marriage lasted only a short while before they divorced, but it was clear to everyone involved that the union had been one of convenience rather than love. Behind the scenes, Davis was devastated. He had lost the woman he loved and was trapped in a sham marriage that only exacerbated his feelings of isolation. Though he was making more money than ever before, it was becoming clear that no amount of fame could protect him from the entrenched racism in Hollywood. But here's what makes it even more interesting. Was this just about race? Or was Davis's meteoric rise also threatening to some of the industry's most powerful figures? After all, he was breaking barriers left and right, becoming not just a black star but one of the biggest stars, period. Could that have been part of the reason the powers that be wanted to control him? The crash that nearly ended it all. Perhaps one of the most tragic and well-known moments of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life was the car crash that nearly killed him. On November 19, 1954, Davis was driving his Cadillac, an extravagant gift from his father and Will Maston, along Route 66 when an elderly woman suddenly pulled out in front of him. The crash was catastrophic, but what made it even worse was the peculiar design of the car itself. The Cadillac steering wheel was equipped with a bullet-shaped horn, a feature that would later be discontinued due to what happened next. When Davis's car collided with the woman's vehicle, his face slammed into the steering wheel, and the bullet-shaped horn punctured his left eye, causing him to lose it permanently. The injury was devastating, both physically and mentally, for Davis. At the time, Davis's career was on an upward trajectory, and the thought of losing his ability to perform was terrifying. But Davis didn't just lose his eye that day, he lost a part of himself. The injury forced him to rethink everything, from his stage presence to his overall identity. For a performer as dynamic as Sammy Davis Jr., the loss of an eye was not just a medical issue, it was a deeply personal crisis. Would he still be able to captivate audiences? Would the disfigurement affect how people saw him? The physical recovery was difficult enough, but the psychological impact was even more profound. Despite the intense pain and the fear of how the injury might affect his career, Davis was back on stage just a few weeks later. He performed with an eye patch, and the audience's reaction was overwhelming. Hollywood stars like Frank Sinatra, Spencer Tracy, and Gary Cooper showed up to support him. The show at Cairo's was packed, and when Davis walked on stage, the applause was thunderous. It was clear that Davis's talent transcended his physical appearance, but the injury left scars that went far deeper than what the audience could see. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. Davis's accident ended up having a ripple effect in the automotive industry. Cadillac, horrified by the injury caused by their steering wheel design, quickly changed the design of their cars to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. It's not every day that a celebrity's accident directly influences car manufacturing, but in this case, it did. But for Davis, the scars went deeper. He became more determined than ever to prove his worth, but the loss of his eye also marked a shift in his personality. Friends and colleagues noticed a darker, more intense side of Davis emerging. He was always driven, but now there was an edge to him, something fueled by the near-death experience and the ever-present racism that continued to plague his career. What's even more shocking is that despite all the success, the awards, and the adulation, Davis was never fully accepted by either the black or white communities. The black community often viewed him as a sellout for his attempts to assimilate into white Hollywood, while the white community continued to see him as an outsider, no matter how many times he performed for packed audiences or starred in hit films. Davis was stuck in between, constantly striving for acceptance, but never quite achieving it. But after all the physical and emotional pain, was it the accident that made Davis more determined to succeed, or was it a catalyst that led him down some of the darker paths he would later take? Forbidden love and dangerous liaisons. Sammy Davis Jr.'s career was riddled with controversy, but none more so than his love life, which became the subject of both public fascination and intense scrutiny. His involvement with Kim Novak, one of Hollywood's brightest stars at the time, was a scandal waiting to explode. It was the 1950s, and interracial relationships were still highly taboo, even more so when one of the parties was as famous as Kim Novak. The chemistry between Davis and Novak was undeniable, but the world they lived in wasn't ready for their romance. Hollywood executives, particularly Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures, where Novak was under contract, were outraged. Novak was Cohn's prized asset, and he wasn't about to let her image be tarnished by her relationship with a black man. Cohn allegedly went to extreme lengths to break them apart, threatening Davis with physical harm. According to reports, Cohn had mob connections and wasn't shy about using his influence. One rumor even suggests that Davis was kidnapped briefly to scare him into ending the relationship. While this claim remains unverified, it illustrates the severity of the situation. Davis was forced into a corner, and the pressure was unbearable. Under threat from Cohn and his powerful allies, Davis ended his relationship with Novak and swiftly married Lorraine White, a black dancer. The marriage was nothing more than a publicity move to distance Davis from Novak and to appease the angry powers that be. The union was short-lived, with Davis reportedly paying White $25,000 to go through with the marriage and then divorce him after a year. It was a clear sign of the control Hollywood execs had over the lives of their stars, particularly when it came to maintaining their image. But Novak wasn't the only woman who stirred controversy in Davis's life. His later marriage to Swedish actress May Britt also turned heads. Although interracial marriages were becoming more common by the 1960s, they were still far from socially accepted. When Davis married Britt in 1960, it made headlines around the world. The media frenzy wasn't just about the marriage itself. It was also about how Davis's union with Britt coincided with John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. At the time, Davis was close with Frank Sinatra, who was a key supporter of Kennedy. The Rat Pack, including Davis, was seen as a political force in Kennedy's rise to power. However, Davis's marriage to a white woman wasn't something Kennedy's camp wanted in the spotlight. It was alleged that Kennedy's team pressured Sinatra to distance himself from Davis to avoid any negative impact on the campaign. This led to a heartbreaking moment when Davis was forced to postpone his wedding to Britt until after the election. Although Davis would go on to marry Britt, the damage was done. He was made to feel as though his personal life was a liability, even to his closest friends. The relationship didn't end in scandal right away, but it was far from smooth. Davis and Britt had 3 children together, 1 biological daughter, Tracy, and 2 adopted sons, Mark and Jeff. But Davis's constant touring and the pressures of his career took a toll on their marriage. In 1968, Davis admitted to having an affair with singer Lola Falana, and the marriage soon dissolved. While the affair was publicized as the cause, some insiders suggest that Davis's life was already spiraling out of control, and the marriage was doomed long before the affair came to light. What's curious about Davis's relationships is that they seem to reflect his ongoing struggle for acceptance. Was he marrying these women because he loved them? Or because he was trying to carve out a place for himself in a world that constantly rejected him? Could it be that his highly publicized relationships were his way of fighting back against the very system that tried to keep him? The truth that shook his legacy. While Sammy Davis Jr.'s life was filled with triumphs, his final years were overshadowed by turmoil, both personal and professional. His health had been deteriorating for years due to his heavy smoking and drinking, but in 1988, things took a serious turn when he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The doctors gave him a devastating ultimatum. Surgery could save his life, but he would lose his ability to sing. For Davis, whose entire identity was wrapped up in his voice and performances, this wasn't just a medical decision, it was an existential one. He chose not to have the surgery, deciding that a life without singing wasn't one worth living. As Davis's health declined, so did the stability around him. His final wife, Altavice Gore, was by his side, but their relationship had its own dark undercurrents. It was reported that Davis had developed an unhealthy obsession with adult films in his later years, allegedly even forcing Altavice into uncomfortable situations. The details remain murky, but it's clear that Davis was battling his own demons as his life spiraled toward its end. But even more shocking was what happened after his death. On May 16, 1990, Davis passed away at the age of 64, leaving behind a complicated legacy. The day after his death, the IRS showed up at his home to collect on the over $7 million in back taxes Davis owed. It was a humiliating and tragic turn of events. Davis, who had given so much to the entertainment world, was left nearly penniless in his final moments, with his estate stripped bare by the government. His widow, Altavis, was left with nothing but mountains of debt. And then came the revelation that would shake his family to its core. Sammy Davis Jr. had adopted two sons, Mark and Jeff, with May Britt, but it wasn't until after his death that rumors began to surface about the true nature of Mark's parentage. According to some reports, Mark had long suspected that Davis was his biological father, despite being presented as an adopted child. This claim wasn't without evidence. Davis had once pulled Mark aside and told him cryptically, "You are my son," leaving Mark to wonder what exactly that meant. In 2013, Mark finally took a DNA test to uncover the truth, and the results were staggering. They confirmed that Mark was not biologically related to either Sammy Davis Jr. or May Britt. This revelation raised more questions than answers. Who were Mark's real parents, and why had Davis kept this secret for so long? Some speculate that Mark was the product of a secret interracial affair, and Davis had adopted him to keep the truth hidden. Whatever the case, this discovery added yet another layer of mystery to Davis's already complicated legacy. What part of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into his incredible yet complicated legacy, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fascinating stories from Hollywood's past. Thanks for watching.